For most people, they have to call a lawyer for the first time. It's terrifying. They don't understand the process and scary words are being thrown at them, like your deposition is scheduled. We have to all be there for the clients, willing to communicate.
That's Marina Bradley. She moved 30% of cases into litigation across all 67 Pennsylvania counties. She believes that understaffing intake to save money creates your most expensive operational leak.
The automations that I use give my staff and team more time to talk to clients, not less. That's the way to use it. It's not to automate everything so that clients are just getting text messages. It's about freeing up time so that they can call them and walk them through another section of the case.
For Marina, automation frees your team for more client conversations. In this episode, you'll learn how one missed intake call could cost $5 million, why understaffing intake to save money creates your most expensive operational leak, and how hiring ahead of need and prioritizing culture fit protects revenue and client experience. I'm Jason Lazarus, and this is Trial Lawyer Review. Marina, welcome to Trial Lawyer Review, and thank you for being with me today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start off with your role. Your title at Ostroff Godshall is Executive Director. That type of role at a plaintiff personal injury firm seems like it's still being defined because many firms still operate in a more traditional managing partner type of an arrangement. How would you describe what you actually do to a firm who has never had someone in your role? And where do you draw the line between your authority and other parts of the law firm leadership structure? Because I know before we came on to start recording the podcast, you were talking about this kind of struggle at times between the different personalities and roles, and someone who is sitting in a trial lawyer seat who really just wants to be a trial lawyer, but doesn't necessarily have the skill set and may not have the right people in the right seats to do what you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an evolving situation for us. Determining who can best help us, what different layers of leadership we need at the firm. It's even hard to admit that you need help sometimes. You come into one of these roles and I take ownership of different pieces of the business. And then when it comes time to sort of give them up, it can be a struggle sometimes. And like you were saying, we have our structure of our managing partner and owner. He really does just love the casework. He would like to be in the courtroom every single day. He doesn't really like the day-to-day managing of the firm. So moving one of the other partners into a leadership role with me and figuring out what kinds of tasks are still in my wheelhouse versus, possibly finding someone to run HR. When I started here, I was doing that. Someone to run intake. When I started, I was doing that. So filling in those roles and figuring out how to best build the firm in a scalable way, because that's the other difficult thing is scaling. When you turn up the levers in the wrong place without the right things in place, it can make a lot of chaos. So we've been trying to get better about that.
Yeah, it seems like that foundational piece is what sometimes is overlooked in the traditional model. And when a firm starts to scale without that foundation, that's when things can really break.
I agree. I think, we've made mistakes as well. We sort of really kicked it into gear with marketing and intake, and we weren't really ready yet. So we had some learning curve, and we've learned lessons from that, where we are always sort of trying to look at our numbers to see where we need to fill gaps before they exist. So maybe I need to start training another medical record specialist because I'm going to move somebody into a case management in my pre-lit department. Like starting to look ahead so that we don't overburden any part of the business when we change things. It's been a lesson that we had to learn because, you can't wait until you need the paralegal to hire the paralegal. You have to have that paralegal training 6 months before. So that's been something. And it's the struggle in the personal injury world. It's not the way firms really operated a couple of years ago. It was sort of just like everybody's hair was on fire all the time. So now I don't ever want to be in that position because it's too hard to grow if you're always just trying to fill in gaps. But it's a lesson that we had to learn, and it's something that we still are learning, but we are open to figuring out the best way to measure. And that's another thing we're measuring a lot. When I started here, we really didn't know our numbers. And now we do. So I can see sort of if all the paralegals are getting to a certain level, it's time to hire somebody before we need them. If all the case manager, like, so I have all those metrics in place so that I know when, we're about to be overburdened and I need to fill somebody in. Like I need another intake specialist because the phones, are ringing X amount of times a day. So all those numbers were difficult. And I think it's also still a struggle for us in litigation, like what the balance is, what the number of files is that's right for each individual. And also, we also have a medical malpractice group, which has been a new thing that we've developed, which has its whole own set of metrics and, needs. And it's been a different animal than our run-of-the-mill MVA, premises, animal bite cases.
Yeah, we run into the same challenges, as handling healthcare liens. We also have specialists and lawyers that are, we're looking at file counts to make sure that they don't get overwhelmed. And it leads me to the next question, which is, as an executive director, you sit between the legal professionals in the firm and the systems that support them. Can you walk me through the operational metrics you were just talking about that you actually watch week over week, and why those, not the ones perhaps lawyers may tend to focus on, are important?
Yeah. So weekly, I am tracking our signed cases, and then I split those by what we call OG cases. That's cases that have resulted from a marketing effort on my part, whether it's Google or social media or television commercial. And then the referred cases, so that's coming from a law firm, cases referred to us from another law firm. I'm also tracking how many complaints are getting filed so I can track how fast things are moving from pre-litigation or pre-suit into litigation. So I can start tracking that time on desk is important to us. We're also tracking how many demands are going out on a weekly basis because we have goals every week and every month for the demands. And then we're tracking resolutions, like how many cases settled. Did they settle in pre-lit, in lit? We're also tracking on more of a monthly basis. I track my cost per case, which is a struggle to blend all of my marketing into one number to get a cost per case. But that's sort of the best way that I can do it right now. Because if you get down to like measuring the PPC, you can get in the weeds with sometimes numbers that seem that are inflated. So it's all a part of, all the things that I'm doing, swag, newsletters, Google, LSAs, everything. And so I try to keep it at a steady number. And so I can watch that on a monthly basis. And then also our average fee is something we're looking at probably monthly because we have a pretty high average fee because we move about 30% of our cases into lit. So we're a heavy litigation firm. We're not a given settling and pre-lit. We are going to file the cases that sometimes other people may not. And also in Pennsylvania, we have limited tort, which is sometimes we have to get over the threshold. So we sometimes do keep cases a little longer than others because of that. We're trying to get treatment to get over the threshold. So those are some of the metrics we are always tracking. And I'm also tracking, we get down to the really nitty gritty. I track, wanted leads signed by agent, so I've really started to delve into all those details.
Of those metrics that you just went through, which of those do you think is most critical in terms of making sure that the firm operates optimally in terms of efficiency and profitability?
We are trying to improve our time on desk right now. That's where I see the biggest problem for us currently. I live and die by intake. So my wanted leads signed, I'll go down rabbit holes of, have to find out why this one, didn't sign. So that's a big one for me because if we're paying that amount of money to get those calls in the door, I want to make sure we're doing everything we possibly can to get the case signed. So I look for those kind of lead leaks, essentially. And I think that's very important too. And now, these are kind of like areas that are my baby. So I guess I favor them. I think if you talk to maybe the head of pre-lit, he would have a differing opinion on what the most important things are. I certainly think that for us, hitting the complaint goals but also like getting settlements done too, getting resolutions. It's just all very important. And that's why we came up with the four main things are like signed cases, demands, complaints, settlements, and on a weekly basis, I am sending a scorecard out to everybody at the firm every week. So everybody knows there's no mysteries and everybody's rowing in the same direction to hit those goals every month. It's not a secret. It's not just a leadership team. And we use it as a real benchmark. And we're really trying to work together to hit every one of those goals every month. We don't always do it, but we all are focused in the same direction.
Well, for selfish reasons, I do think time on desk is such a critical thing that sometimes gets overlooked, particularly in the area that we assist with, which is liens, because a lot of times that will extend how long a case sits because all those have to be resolved before disbursement and all the issues that can create from a client experience standpoint, as well as delaying recognition of income for the law firm. So I do think that time on desk, along with everything else that you said, is super important. But I did want to highlight that because I do think there is some real importance in law firms really examining that time on desk, because I don't think a lot of firms dive into that as deeply as they could or should to help them run better in terms of their just efficiency.
Yeah. And if I go into my resolutions right now and I look at what's holding up all the checks that can't be deposited, quite a few of them are because of medical liens or something that needs to be reduced, or we're waiting on somebody to get back to us with something. It really is a struggle for sure. And it's definitely one of the things that holds up that resolution, process. And it's definitely, you can have a client that's super happy, but now they've been waiting 3 months for their check and they need that money and they've taken loans, and so it becomes, you can really lose a happy client in the time after they have resolved their case and they're thrilled by delaying the payment. And there's all kinds of things that, that are not preventable sometimes to us, but there are also things that we could be doing more proactively to get that money to our clients, which is the most important thing.
Yeah. And unfortunately, with what's going on now, a lot of these subro vendors like Rawlings, which is now Machinify, and Conduit and Optum, and all these companies are deploying AI to evaluate things and offshoring. And so it's causing massive delays in just getting basic information too, which is frustrating, I know, for law firms that are trying to disperse to clients, and then obviously to the client who's waiting on their money, and that can impact whether they leave you a 5-star Google review or not, which is, obviously critical. But you describe your work as enabling teams to deliver impactful results, not running operations for its own sake. What's the difference between a leader that sits in your seat who optimizes for process and one who optimizes for moving cases and clients forward with that customer client experience focus?
Yeah, I definitely have a customer and client experience focus. And that also leads me, I'm looking at my team to make sure we're all a cultural fit. That's important to me. And part of that is then treating our clients really well. It's not just about the numbers. It's about really making sure every client is having a good experience from the first call they make, the first web form they fill out, through their case manager and litigation, and that they feel informed. I think a scary thing, we all forget how scary it is to need a lawyer. For most people, they have to call a lawyer for the first time. It's terrifying. And they don't understand the process, and scary words are being thrown at them, like your deposition is scheduled. Like, we have to all be there for the clients, willing to communicate. I've tried to set up, when we talk about even like automations and things, the automations that I use are to give my staff and team more time to talk to clients, not less. That's the way to use it. It's not to automate everything so that clients are just getting text messages. It's about freeing up time so that they can call them and walk them through another section of the case. And so I'm always looking in every part of the business for that client experience. So when they first call and they get my intake people, that they're getting empathy and warmth, and you've come to the right place, and that they mean it. And when they get a case manager, that they are being treated respectfully, and they're getting the help and the treatment that they need, and that they. I also, from an operations standpoint, though, when we talked about like making sure people aren't don't have too many cases, too much to do, because I have to look at that as, if my case managers have 100 people to call and they're supposedly calling it every day, there's only a limit of how many times they can call.
Hi, quick question for you. Does lien resolution administration feel like a quiet bottleneck inside your firm? Medical liens, Medicare compliance follow-ups, and documentation can drag on long after the case is resolved, tying up capital and attention your team could be using elsewhere. This is where Synergy can help. We partner with personal injury law firms to handle complex healthcare lien resolution and compliance work, helping firms move cases to resolution more efficiently without adding internal burden or more overhead. If that sounds like something your firm is dealing with, you can learn more by clicking the link in the show notes or scanning the QR code on the screen. Now back to the conversation.
What you just talked about for someone who's been through their own personal injury case, personal injuries, they say it's personal injury because it's intensely personal. And like what I went through, I know because I experienced it firsthand that is such an important thing for law firms to understand, is not to lose that personal touch with what's going on with technology. Use technology to take off your team's plate, and outsourcing to companies like ours, these administrative level tasks that ultimately take away the time that could be spent either enhancing the value of cases or better client experience and client communication. Because without that, again, those 5-star Google reviews are hard to come by if you're not providing the right kind of experience for the client, given, what you outlined, which is that people don't like having to call lawyers. And particularly in this situation, it's such a difficult process, even for me, who had been part of the industry for 15, 20 years. When this happened to me, I still found it incredibly daunting and difficult. And I had a whole team around me that was helping pick up the slack. For my jaw was wired shut for 3 months, so it was kind of hard to do my job well with your jaw wired shut. So I was very lucky and fortunate compared to most people that go through this. I had it easy, really.
I was reading about how you had an experience in like a personal experience, which was interesting because that's sort of how Rich Godshall got into this as well. His father was a union carpenter that was injured on the job, and Rich took him to lawyers to speak to lawyers, and they were talking down to him essentially. And Rich thought, going to go into personal injury, and I'm never going to talk to a client like that. I'm going to make everybody feel like they're important, because they are. And Rich has, his famous story of, what he does every afternoon. He writes 2 clients' phone numbers on a Post-it and calls them from the car so that he can talk to them for a couple minutes, just see how they are, how they're feeling. And that's something that he's just kept doing. Now we're trying to do that more with like apps and, maybe not just the Post-it note, but it's organizing and systematizing it a little bit more. But it's the concept that, the firm owner's calling you because you're important. Truthfully, that's how he runs the business and how he always wanted to run the business, where the clients are the most important people.
It's meaningful. So I wanted to go back to something you mentioned, which was scaling. And most firms grow until something just breaks. And looking at OG and the firms you talk to through ALA, what typically do you see is kind of the threshold where a firm that's founder-led in terms of operations stops scaling, and what are the signs that that's starting to happen?
I think that people are getting a little bit better at knowing that they need some mid-level help, but I still think there's a struggle in admitting it, because I think people, especially like high-performing attorneys who have started their own firms, they think they can do it all. And when they start to realize that you have to admit that someone else can be better at stuff than you are, once you can have that admission to yourself, and sometimes it's a struggle, I think that's when you see that it's time. But I don't know. I think I've seen it happen in a number of different ways. Some people just start to get burnt out, or they take advice and they hire in the wrong area. So I think it's hard to have one quantifying, factor that says you need this person. And I know there's people who say if you have 20 employees, you need this. So there are some metrics people go by, but I think that it's been a struggle for even me. Like we've hired like pieces that I need, and I've been sort of against them because it's human nature, I think, to feel like we want to be in control. And I think that's what's tough is the owners letting go of some of the control but they have to be ready to give somebody else some trust so that they're able to make decisions on their behalf and make the right decisions on their behalf. And I don't think there's an exact time or number that you can know, but I think when you know that you need the help.
We're talking again before the podcast started a little bit about Rich loving to be in the courtroom. And some of what you just talked about is for lawyers to think, well, what do I really love doing? Some, like Mike Morris I talked to said, I realized I really love the business aspect of this. But then I did need a COO and, so, I mean, it's starting to have that recognition of, well, who do I need around me for this to grow and scale without it really breaking, I think is really kind of the bottom line of it.
Yeah. And who's going to be responsible for tracking? Once you figure out the metrics, or you maybe need help figuring out those metrics, who's going to oversee them and track them and keep the departments on base? And like, it can be difficult. And I think some of the law firm owners love the marketing piece, or they love the business piece, or there are different areas that they love. And I think that's where they end up filling different gaps first. They stay in the piece that they love and they replace the pieces that they don't love, there's an exercise that Mike Morse and John do where you sort of do like this kind of heat map of like what you're good at and what you like doing. And you want to generally be doing the things you're good at and like doing. And in the beginning, you're going to have to do some of the things that you're good at and hate doing. But you should probably not be doing a ton of the things that you are bad at and hate doing. So that's like a good exercise in figuring out, I feel like, where you first need to turn for help. I thought it was enlightening when I did that because I sort of never thought about the fact that like, boy, I hate this, like we have to find help for this because I hate it. And I'm not great at it either. So, and I should be concentrating on the stuff I like and I'm good at. So I think owners that can do that exercise with themselves realize where they need to turn first for help.
Well, that's a great segue into the next question. So I know this is a generalization, but I think it is pretty true that trial lawyers typically love to litigate, but they tend to hate the cleanup when the case resolves. And I'm curious about what systems you've put into place at OG to protect client outcomes and firm health after the resolution of a case when the lawyers have, already moved on to the next case.
We've talked about the struggles of, getting the checks from the adjusters and the insurance companies. It's something Rich is constantly struggling with and yelling about on LinkedIn because it is really difficult. And we want to make sure the client doesn't feel like they've just been forgotten about after that case resolves. I mean, the attorneys are still staying in communication with them. And also the paralegals is very important, my litigation paralegals or the case managers if it resolved in pre-lit. They're staying in touch with the client to keep them posted so people know exactly what's going on and what has happened last in their case, whether by email or text message. We use an app, giving them a phone call so that they don't feel lost or uninformed. Even if the answer isn't, always the best news, we may have to wait another week, somebody's on vacation or whatever. They're being communicated with at all times. And then I think they still feel our advocacy because we're still fighting to have, their medical bills reduced or see what we can do to get a reduction if they've taken a loan. We're still really trying to help them. It's not just, okay, shut the book and you're out. And then also we're emailing them asking, if you had a great experience with me, we'd love if you could leave us a review. And so hopefully if people are asking for a review, they know that they've done really good work for the client. We have a lot of luck with that. With the attorney, even sometimes just texting the person personally with a link to our Google reviews. So those are all the things. And we always point out to them, if you ever need us, just call us. It's a concept that we say a lot at the end of the case. So just reminding people that we're always here for them. That's another thing that I've tried to do a lot more of with our marketing is staying top of mind. So people have a great experience with a lawyer, but 5 years passes and someone gets in an accident, they don't remember who it is. You have to sort of be staying top of mind, however that works. I'm sending out, magnets or newsletters or what so that people are remembering that they had a good experience with us. Because it's just people forget.
Yeah, being top of mind is a critical thing for marketing. So you came into personal injury law from the dark side, I believe, an insurance defense firm. I'm curious what your previous role taught you about operations that most plaintiff firm leaders never see.
I think that coming from the other side was very interesting to me. When I came over to personal injury, it was so different. It did take me some time to really adjust. Now, I definitely learned a ton at my insurance defense firm about law offices, running an office, a lot of the logistics of running a business. However, the concepts of dealing with insurance companies and adjusters versus dealing with clients directly was very different, and intake, all those things. It really took me, I think, 3 months to get my bearing. I could do the nitty gritty. I knew how to hire a payroll company and, get our insurance benefits together and, sign leases. But the concept of personal injury was something that it took me some time to get my head around. And I absolutely love it. I think to myself, there's nowhere I'd rather be. So I'm thankful for that firm for teaching me, but also so much happier on the plaintiff side, which a lot of people say. So, but I feel like it's more rewarding working for, the clients and doing things for people and always thinking about people, not thinking about, oh, this adjuster needs to save an extra $100 and, all the billable hour nonsense and tracking billable hours. And, by the time I left that firm, in the beginning, if we had an invoice under $500, we could pay directly and bill. But chipping away, the insurance companies chipped away. You couldn't print anything. They wouldn't pay for the pages. You couldn't. And it just is exhausting from that side of things. And it gets worse all the time. So it's easier here to feel like you're working for a person, not a machine.
Yeah, I did insurance defense work right out of law school, and that for about 3 years did medical malpractice and workers' compensation defense work. And it drove me crazy. I could not see doing that for the rest of my career. And when I decided to get into this side of the business, wanted to be on the side of the plaintiff to help people that were injured, just because I always felt like I was part of the problem, not part of the solution on the defense side. Not that there's no place for that, because clearly there needs to be representation on both sides, but it is hard, I think, to sit on that side of the table if you have empathy and see what happens to people in these situations.
Yeah, I agree. I remember just the stories of the fights we'd be having about the time of suffering and stuff. I would get it would exhaust me to be fighting to say, oh, this person only suffered for 3 seconds or whatever. It's just that kind of stuff just wore on me. So over here, it's not like it's perfect, but I do feel like we're advocating for somebody who deserves it. And it's also just interesting. And the business is very different. I do think personal injury firms are run differently. There's more of a culture mentality with our, we have core values and social contracts, and those things are important to us. And finding people that fit into the roles here, I think it's been important to keep in mind we're looking for a certain personality that has many different skills, But I think a lot of times we're looking for some certain traits in our lawyers, everybody, that are important to our firm culture. And I think that's a little different than when you're just working for insurance companies and just kind of cranking out work. And I think it's been difficult, so Rich came from insurance defense also. So he was insurance defense for 10 years. So, it's been interesting to change my mindset about it, but it's been very enjoyable too. And I would not want to go back to insurance defense. Although, like you said, there's also a place for them. And I have many friends still on the insurance defense side.
So you just mentioned something that I think is key, and I wanted to double click on it quickly. The culture and values. How did you go about either changing it or instilling that if it had not been created when you joined?
It had not been created when I joined. We first sort of sent something around to the whole firm and asked people to put like 1 or 2 or 3 things that defined us, they felt like. So then we took a look at everything that people said and looked for some common things and looked for some, but also to an extent, I don't know that that's the exercise to do. That's the way we did it. But at the end of the day, we sat down and decided which 4 things were really me and Rich and Ryan. Because it really had to come from us and we had to believe it. And we struggled back and forth a lot. But we did an exercise where we just sort of hit them around for a while in emails. And then we decided these are the 4 that represent us. That's us. It doesn't need to be all 40 people here. We should be looking for people who fit these that we write. So that's kind of how we did it. We did take into account some of the things people had said, but we also didn't just go with whatever 15 people said this, so it's our, that's our, goals. So we also wrote the social contract as a separate piece at around the same time as the core values. Social contract is a more voluminous document of laying out more about what we define as this place, like the things about the people here and what's important to us, that the client is the most important, that, everybody's here to help each other, and everybody here can, help at any level, not, we don't gossip, all the things that were important to us. It was easier to say, we have grit, we have empathy, but those things are still really important to us. We communicate. So those were kind of things that we had to come to the realization that we had to pick out what was important to us and then find people that fit into that rather than the other way around. Just go with what everybody wanted to do. And I think it's been an interesting exercise. I really do look at the core values when I'm interviewing candidates. We used to interview candidates and just they seemed okay, they were capable, but we didn't actually dive into that to see if they really fit in with our core values. So now we do. And we even have done some personality testing. We've started doing predictive index testing to try to even profile the people who work in certain roles. Because there's different personality types that fit into different roles here. So it's not like we need one cookie cutter person, but we've been developing what type of people have success in what roles. It's been interesting. And also just the borderline, we do want the people to have their core values. It is important to us because it's important at every step of the case, from intake to me to anybody that anyone's going to have a touch point with at this firm, the attorneys, everybody. So it's been a learning experience, but we finally, in the last 2 years, I think got it hammered out. We hung them up on giant, I had them made and we hung them in our war room. So they're always there, and we give them in the handbook to every new employee and they sign the social contract. And that's been very important to me because it goes beyond dress code, your hours are 9 to 5. It's really we're candid about it when we're interviewing people as well, because we want people to know who we are. And it's been a very nice way to be able to give somebody a one sheet that just says who me and Rich are, I think.
Yeah, recruiting for culture fit is just as important as skill set, in my opinion, because if you've got the right skill set, but you're not the right cultural fit, that's problematic, or just as problematic as if you don't have the skill set. And using some of these evaluative tools like predictive index, which we use, is a great way to figure out if that candidate really has the right personality profile for the role that they're going to fulfill in the firm. So critical.
That was a tough lesson to learn, honestly, because I would get very skilled, resumes and people who had experience, and I would go with that, and I would ignore the not a cultural fit. And what happens then is those people tend, even if they're high performing, they tend to take everybody down a little bit with them. And they poison things, and it ends up being not great. I would rather, they say hire for traits, train for skill. I mean, easier said than done at a law firm. I would love more ability to train better, something else that I'm working on internally, but it's been a struggle, man, just because, I'm trying to get trainings together for jobs I don't really know how to do, like litigation paralegal. But that's definitely been a goal of mine, so that I can do more robust training, so that when I find those cultural fits, we're able to get them in and really get them trained. And also just having trainings of everything at the firm, because, in a firm our size, you have only one person knows how to do one thing. So I've been trying to change that as well.
Yeah, having some redundancy. So I wanted to ask you about operational leaks. So, and I'm going to list a few things: intake, resolution administration, medical records, lien resolution. Where do you see the most expensive operational leaks in a typical personal injury firm? And what do most leaders get wrong about fixing those sorts of things?
I think, again, this is going to be my opinion, which is probably, biased, but I think that the most expensive leak is in intake. To me, one call could be $5 million. If you don't have your processes set up, and if you're trying to save money in intake by taking shortcuts, I just think that's the wrong way to go about it, because it's just the area where every single one of those calls is possibly a multi-million-dollar case. Now you have to withstand a lot of calls that aren't cases at all. We call them KO. We cut KO or turn down a lot of them. But we err on the side of getting signed documentation as soon as possible, so that we can start investigating the case. And then, if it's not a case, fine. But we're trying to get as many signed as we can, so we can get a better look, because to me, that's where the most expensive leak is. Now, there's definitely an argument to be made that in the resolutions, if the clients are not getting checks, and like you said, medical records is a big problem, because medical records can take a long time, and that affects the time on desk. So that, the client's sitting in pre-lit and we can't get medical records. Again, the liens, it's definitely a holdup. But I would say time on desk is probably the other financial hole, because if you can cut a couple of months off the time on desk, you're putting revenue in the previous year, kind of. You're shortening everything up. You're doing 14 months of revenue in 12 months if you can start speeding things up a little bit. So that's definitely a goal of mine. I'm not perfect. I've gotten pretty good on intake, because I've just put the processes and the people in place. You have to have a little bit of a heavy staff in your intake department that's trained, and they're empathetic, and there's we're constantly listening to the recordings of the staff and making improvements and coaching, because I just think you never know which call is the next big case. And also, we want to help as many people as we can too. We want to, we really think we're the best. And that's something that's important in my intake, that they really do believe that we are the best, that they would recommend their family come here, if they had a case. And I truly believe they all do believe that. So yeah, it's something that I think that me and Rich have not agreed with all the time, because I feel like that needs to be an overly staffed department.
Yeah, I understand that perspective, and certainly not alone. I've had plenty of guests who have talked about specifically the intake being so critical in terms of the investment recoupment, because the dollars it costs to bring those cases in. And if you have an intake process that's broken and you miss out on converting a case, that's a significant revenue issue, that lost revenue issue.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not getting any cheaper to advertise, especially in markets like yours, markets like mine in Pennsylvania. Like, everywhere is a billboard. You drive around Philadelphia. I've driven around Florida too. It's just billboard after billboard after billboard of, a lot of personal injury. And then you go online and it's competitive. The TV market, there's big names that have just millions of dollars a month in budgets. So to compete with all of that is expensive. And so that's why it's so important to me.
Yeah, and you got to convert if you're competing with those. I had mentioned before your involvement with ALA, which is Association of Legal Administrators, and I know you're the vice president, I think newly installed for your independence chapter. And I think you're also involved with some of the legal administrator folks with AAJ, because I know there's a group there. What conversations are happening among legal administrators that trial lawyers should be hearing, but maybe are not?
That's an interesting question. I think there's a lot of conversations happening regarding, technology, what technology is most helpful in a law firm, what's going to speed up processes, what is going to make make processes move faster is essentially what it is. And there's just so much chatter. It's hard to boil it down. And I don't think anybody's sure where the right area to start is or what is going to help, move along cases. I don't think that the attorneys are as dialed into that stuff as they should be sometimes. So I think they have to start listening to some advice. And the thing is, with respect to some of the technology out there, it may speed up processes that aren't as, fun or high level or whatever you want to call it with the attorney level, but they do speed up the general running of an office. And so that's number one to me. The other things that are being talked about, just lots of things with people and building staffs and building teams, I think, and team building exercises. And I think getting Gen Z involved in the workplace, I think it's very important to them that they have certain intangibles that I don't know that everybody is talking about so much. There's little things that get them engaged, like knowing the why about why things are done a certain way. And so I've been trying to learn more about how to engage Gen Z. They're working remotely. They're used to it. They were in high school remotely, and making peace with the old version of a law firm where people are in the office until 7:00 at night every night versus they're working from home and they're getting plenty done. So there's conversations about the in office versus remote, I think, as well.
Yeah, great point. And especially on the technology side, I think one of the keys from having a number of guests on the podcast talking about what's going on right now is really understanding where the levers are in your practice by mapping out areas where perhaps technology can be deployed to take some of the administrative burden off the team so that they can focus more on, as I said earlier, either enhancing value of cases or better client experience, more touches of that particular client. And, that was part of what we just launched a AI / human in the loop solution for verifying healthcare recovery obligations. So because that is such a time consuming task for many law firms, that using technology to do that and removing that step from the team is something that frees the team up to do other tasks. So evaluating your practice from that lens of what is repetitive, what is administrative, what can be done by technology, that then frees the team up to do high level legal work or high level touch work with the personal injury victim.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's what we were talking about not using the automations to be client facing, but using them to speed processes so that we can be more client facing. It's definitely been a huge thing. And the technologies are just changing so fast also. Everything from phone systems, even, not just AI, but everything has changed and developed, and you have to keep up. And it is difficult to keep up because it's almost like a new company pops up every like 5 minutes. And it's hard to weed through all the chatter and figure out what's going to actually help and what isn't. And if you believe everybody that comes down the road, you'd be signing contracts every day. So you have to really be able to evaluate things with a critical eye. And that's time consuming. And that's something that the lawyers, shouldn't have to, at the entrepreneur level ones should be able to trust people like me, I guess, to make those choices. But sometimes they're also hard to make without the input of the lawyers, because it's things that really work in, our CRMs or whatever else. And we need input from multiple layers of the business to really evaluate.
Yeah, and figuring out what that tech stack looks like and how it all interacts and works together is pretty critical. And it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out with the kind of tension between now some of the AI platforms and how they dovetail with the case management systems and all of that. To me, that's a very interesting thing to see what the future holds for all of that. You've been very generous with your time. A couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. If you were starting a new personal injury firm tomorrow with one founding partner and a goal to scale to 30 lawyers, what would be the first 3 operational systems you put in place before hiring anyone?
Operational systems that I put in place. I think that's a tough question, man. Because system-wise, I feel like, I would start documenting everything that I know in each department to make it into a system so that I could teach whoever I'm hiring. So I would know that I pretty much have to do, many of these things still, but I wouldn't just have it living in my head. I would have it all, out. I'd make video recordings. I would do whatever I needed to do to get all of that into a process where people could basically go to Marina's personal injury law firm university, I guess, sort of, and it would just document every piece. And then I think I would also, I would put a lot of security in place too. Cybersecurity, online security. I would make sure I had a good secure phone, secure email. I think people don't put enough into that. That's where you see people get into trouble, and it's such a dangerous, dangerous game to play. And then
AI policies too, right?
AI policies too. Yep. Now, I have one I'm working on right now. It's not finished. And I see a lot of emails that I know ChatGPT wrote coming my way. So I do have to get a little more in place. I do know, we have to have some control on that because it's very dangerous to be putting things into open chat with names or anything. So the policy has to be there and it has to be overseen also, because you have to be able to prove that people aren't doing it. So I think those would be the things I would do first, because I think if I was starting all over, I'd have to get out everything that I know so I could start again, and then work from there and try to build.
Which is key. I mean, the foundational aspects of processes within a company or a law firm, no different. It's to scale. You've got to have that so it becomes repeatable as you bring on more and more people. So key foundational thing.
It gets missed a lot because law firms, owners start, they have 5 employees that they took from 3 firms they used to work at. And they all do things different, but that's okay. And then you start to have some success and you're putting people into different roles, or you're forcing people to do things that are out of their wheelhouse, So you have all the paralegals answering intake. but you're not doing a great job on intake if that's your processes. So I think like it's better to have a real system in place and know where you're going. And I think that would lead me to make the decisions about who I added next as I got to add more employees.
Yeah, great point. So final question, I always ask this and it's very open-ended. So you can answer it however you want. As an experienced personal injury firm operational executive, what is your view?
I think my view is that this space is changing for a number of reasons. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I do know with, MSOs, the managed services organization starting with venture capital and private equity, not only in Arizona, but the MSOs lead it into other places with the competitiveness of marketing, with the changes coming from AI. This is a space that's rapidly changing. And about the only thing I can control is making sure I'm giving people the number one best client experience that I can possibly give them. And that my entire team is focused on that as well. Because to me, and the other thing is being involved in the community is important again. We do a backpack drive. We gave away 1,000 backpacks last year. We'll be bigger this year. Doing those things in the community to prove that you are a part of the community and you're not just a lawyer from, another state that's just running, $10 million in advertising. I think those things are becoming more and more important. You have to prove to people that you are a part of the community. And I just think those are the only things I can control. I can't control Google or AI search, and we can try to keep up and, do all of the marketing, but I can't spend as much as the big guys. So I have to set us apart in a different way. That's why that's always been my focus, because I saw even a couple of years ago, everything has just gotten more expensive, gotten more difficult. The spend's out of control, the TV, online, everything. So setting us apart in whatever way I can, if that's making videos that explains processes, if it's, making sure that Rich is calling a couple clients every night, all the things that we can do to set ourselves apart and also produce great results. Rich is a great lawyer. We have great lawyers here and paralegals and everybody, and we are fighting. We fight. So you can go somewhere else and, but we're going to fight for your case. We're going to fight for you. And that is truly, we have grit as a main one of our, core values. And we believe that because we're going to fight for people. And it sounds cliche sometimes, but it really is true.
No, all great points. Thank you. Appreciate your time today. If anyone has any questions about anything that you've talked about during today's episode, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
You can email me at mbradley@oglaw.com.
And if anyone listening needs to refer a case in your jurisdiction, what types of cases do you handle and what's the best way to learn a bit about OG Law?
I mean, you can certainly learn about us on our website, oglaw.com. You can see our practice areas. We're primarily motor vehicle accident, premises, slip and falls, and animal bites in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. That's the only states that we handle cases in. We've had a successful verdict or settlement in all 67 counties in Pennsylvania, which sort of sets us apart because we really are Pennsylvania's statewide local law firm. And you can send the cases my way. We're happy to have a conversation with an attorney, and Rich would be happy to have a conversation with somebody if they wanted to refer a case. We also do handle medical malpractice cases in Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
Thanks again, Marina, for joining me on the podcast, and we'll see everybody on the next episode of Trial or Review.
If today's episode gave you a new perspective on how your firm operates or sparked a useful idea, consider sharing it with a colleague and be sure to follow the show so you don't miss future conversations with leaders across the personal injury space. Trial or Review is brought to you by Synergy, a strategic operations partner helping personal injury law firms resolve healthcare liens more efficiently. If you're looking to accelerate case flow and allow your team to focus on high-level legal work that moves cases faster, consider partnering with Synergy. I'm Jason Lazarus, and I'll see you in the next episode.